All right, let's get into it. For the longest time, for almost a century, we thought we had the story figured out. How people first got to the Americas. It was this epic, straightforward tale of survival. But wow, in just the last few decades, a handful of incredible discoveries have basically torn that entire script to shreds. We're now rewriting one of the most important chapters in all of human history.
You've probably heard the story before. It's almost like a movie. You've got brave hunters, a vast frozen landscape, gigantic beasts. It was a really neat, simple story that everybody just accepted as fact. But there was a huge problem starting to bubble up. The evidence on the ground just wasn't matching the story everyone was telling.
So let's start with that classic story. It has a name, the Clovis first model. And for generations, this was the only story in town. The whole idea was that a single heroic group of people migrated down and populated 2 entire continents.
And the theory was, you gotta admit, beautifully simple. It had just 3 main steps. Step 1, people walk from Siberia into Alaska over a land bridge that existed during the Ice Age. Step 2, they hang out for a while, waiting for these 2 massive Canadian ice sheets to pull apart, which creates this narrow, ice-free corridor they can travel south through. And finally, step 3, around 13,000 years ago, they pop out south of the ice and become these master mammoth hunters, using their brand new invention, the iconic Clovis spear point.
And look, this wasn't some fringe idea. This was scientific dogma. Everywhere archaeologists looked, they found these unique Clovis points right next to mammoth bones. It seemed like a slam dunk. This was the story you saw in every museum, the one you read in every textbook. It was pretty much case closed. Or so we thought.
Then, deep in the jungles of Mexico, in a place you would never, ever think to look, cave divers found something that, according to the official story, just shouldn't exist. They found a skeleton that would break the Clovis first model wide open. And her name was Eva.
So Eva was found in this huge, flooded cave system. Now, back in the Ice Age, these caves were totally dry, and her people carried her body almost a quarter of a mile into the pitch-black darkness to lay her to rest. It seems like it was a very deliberate ritual burial. When scientists finally dated her bones, they got a total shock. Eva turned out to be the oldest, most complete human skeleton ever found in the Americas, and her age, well, it created a massive problem for the old theory.
Okay, so here's the paradox. This is the big one. Eva was buried down in southern Mexico 13,500 years ago. But the only way south, that ice-free corridor we talked about, it didn't even open for another 500 years. So how could she possibly be in Mexico before the front door was even unlocked?
You can see how this simple contradiction just completely stumped archaeologists. If the only highway south was blocked solid with ice, how in the world did Eva and her people get there? It forced everyone to go back to the drawing board and look for a completely different way into the Americas.
To solve this puzzle, this Eva problem, scientists came up with a pretty radical new idea. What if the first Americans didn't walk through a corridor of ice at all? What if they paddled? What if they came by boat along the coast? This is what we now call the coastal highway theory.
So, instead of waiting for these massive glaciers to melt on land, this theory suggests that the first people were actually mariners. They could have traveled in small boats right down the Pacific coast, living off all the rich sea life, fish, seals, seaweed. Some people call it the Kelp Highway. And here's the crucial part. This route could have been opened way, way earlier, maybe even as far back as 16,000 years ago. And that easily explains how Eva's ancestors could have been in Mexico long before that inland path was clear.
And it wasn't just Eva. The evidence just kept piling up. Out in Washington state, archaeologists found a mastodon rib bone. And get this, it had a spear point made of bone jammed right into it. The date? 13,800 years old. That's a full 800 years before the Clovis people were even supposed to be there. This was undeniable proof of pre-Clovis hunters. The old story was officially falling apart.
So just as this whole new picture is starting to come into focus, another skeleton is found, this time in 1996 along the Columbia River. He's known as Kennewick Man, or as local tribes call him, the Ancient One. And his remains kicked off a decades-long battle, a real clash between scientific investigation and deeply held traditional beliefs. On one side of the fight, you had scientists like Doug Owsley. He studied the skeleton and right away noticed the skull shape was really different from modern Native Americans. It was longer,
narrower. He said it looked more like ancient coastal peoples from Asia, or maybe even Polynesians. And this led to a pretty explosive theory that maybe there were two completely different groups of people who migrated to the Americas.
But on the other side, tribal leaders like Armand Minthorn were saying, hold on. Our oral traditions, our stories, have always told us that we have been here since the beginning of time. For them, the Ancient One was an ancestor, period. Their connection wasn't based on measuring a skull, it was based on an unbroken spiritual and cultural link passed down through generations.
So, the battle lines were drawn. Was the Ancient One a direct ancestor of Native Americans living today, just like the tribes have always said, or was he part of some other earlier group of people that just vanished, which is what the skull shapes seem to hint at? For years and years, that question just hung in the air.
But science was about to unleash a brand new tool, something that could look right past the shape of a bone and read the story that was literally written inside it. The key to solving the whole mystery of Kennewick Man, and really the peopling of the Americas, was ancient DNA. After years of legal wrangling, scientists finally got permission to extract a tiny genetic sample. You see, the whole controversy was about what the bones looked like on the outside. But the real answer, it turned out, was coded deep, deep inside.
And the results were, well, they were crystal clear. The DNA proved that Kennewick Man is more closely related to modern Native Americans than to anyone else on the entire planet. The oral traditions of the tribes, they were right all along. And with that single finding, the whole idea of two different migrations just collapsed. Genetically, Eva Alta in Mexico, the Clovis hunters on the plains, and Kennewick Man in the Northwest, they're all from the same founding population. They are all ancestors of today's Native Americans. They are all one people. So that leaves one big question, right? Why did the skulls look so different? The answer is actually pretty simple. Evolution. As our diets and lifestyles change, our bodies change too. That shift from a really tough hunter-gatherer diet to softer foods from farming literally changed the shape of human skulls over thousands of years. In fact, our own skulls have shrunk and changed shape in just the last 10,000 years. They look different from their ancestors because their lives were different, but they were still the same people.
So what's the big takeaway here? The new story of the first Americans is definitely messier, it's older, and it's so much more complex than we ever thought. But at its heart, it's a story about explorers. It doesn't matter if they came by land or by sea, these pioneers were pushing into a world that no human being had ever seen before. As the anthropologist John Hawkes says, that genetic link, that spirit of exploration connects us all directly to them. And it really makes you wonder, what frontiers are we exploring today?